This episode of Liquid Assets is sponsored by HASA, the leader in water treatment solutions. HASA delivers eco-friendly, reliable, and cost-effective water care and has been keeping communities safe, one drop at a time. They've been at it for more than 60 years, and you can learn more about HASA by visiting hasa.com. That's HASA, HASA.com. Welcome to Liquid Assets. I'm your host, Ravi Kurani, and Liquid Assets is a podcast where we talk about the intersection of business, technology, and policy, all as it looks at the world of water. Today, we have an awesome guest for you. We have Rich Sloan calling in from Las Vegas. Rich, how are you doing today?
Woo! Hello from Las Vegas. Doing great. Doing great is the answer. I'm doing great. It's good to be alive.
Since we're on Las Vegas, let's open up with Las Vegas. Las Vegas is, I think the world knows where Las Vegas is, but I'll just hand over the mic because I feel like Las Vegas as a city is really interesting, but also in its relation to water. And so let's just jump in there.
I think that's very fair. You know, if I'll talk about Las Vegas because I love talking about my hometown. The story of Las Vegas could not be more coupled to the water in this region. And that's really the story of humanity. You know, if you go all the way back to the beginning of civilizations, they cozied right up to a reliable source of water. It was pretty key. And it's fair to view, you know, as I look out my window from my home office and I see Mars-like landscape out there with nothing growing seemingly, Las Vegas really is an anomaly. And yet we are a thriving community, and we are thriving while we are completely dependent on the Colorado River as our water resource, and specifically Lake Mead, the reservoir that gathers together all of that Colorado River water. What an extraordinary 100 years it has been for this community. So the very beginnings of this community were actually at a spring right in the middle of town, and that quickly went away. Got used up, and we looked to Lake Mead after Hoover Dam was built, and filled up that incredible reservoir. And then many of us have seen today I guess they call them the soap rings or whatever, basically the white walls around Lake Mead, reflecting dramatic use and drop of that resource. I think we are down significantly. You know, I want to say the numbers are like 33% of capacity, something like that. So a dramatic drop. That said, with so many parties that use the water, 7 states and Mexico itself that use the water, what Las Vegas has achieved with that water has been extraordinary in conservation and reuse. So when I brush my teeth in the morning, the water that goes down the sink goes out to a processing facility, gets cleaned, and then goes back into Lake Mead. And so 99%, they say, here at the Southern Nevada Water Authority, of the water that we use in that way is recycled. 60% of water still is consumptive use. So that's things like water features or pools. It's things like irrigation, and definitely things like evaporative cooling. And evaporative cooling, the numbers hunt on that. That's why it's done in terms of the economics, but the numbers don't hunt in terms of losing just that precious resource to the atmosphere. Nonetheless, it is fair to say Las Vegas is leading the world in its achievements in water conservation, even with a 50% increase in total population of this community over recent decades. There has been a absolute reduction in water usage. That's extraordinary. So I'm really proud to be a Las Vegan, and I can't help but be obsessed with water. It not only because of all the realities that I just mentioned to you, but also because I'm originally from Michigan. Michigan is the land of fresh water, literally surrounded by the greatest surface water resource, freshwater resource on the planet. And then very specifically, I'm from Flint, Michigan, which definitely has a water story. And so I just have this heightened awareness about water and its extraordinary and fundamental value to humanity, civilization. And I'll share just one last thing, and I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but I really feel this now that I've become so steeped in what's happening with the water resources. Water is a very local resource. So it's a very local issue, but it's going to be a global problem in terms of the global civilization. And I think it's fair to say that we have exited the period where water is abundant, fresh water is abundant, free, pure or clean. And we have entered into a new phase in many communities, and most communities will see this over the decade ahead. I love that you do your podcast, and I love that you educate people about water. And I hope that one of the outcomes of our conversation is that we get people wanting to dive deeper, like me, becoming evangelists about water, and its responsible use and innovation that will really help solve our existential challenges related to water.
And I think we'll also touch a little bit on that on kind of your role on a secure water future, and I want to bookmark that for later. But I want to roll back on two things that you mentioned in your story of Las Vegas. The first is did I hear you correctly that Las Vegas's population has increased by 50%, and there's been a third decrease in actual net use of water? Is that am I saying that incorrectly?
Yes, you're repeating correctly back what I said, but let me be a little bit loose with like the facts on this, but these are ranges that I think are appropriate. It was something like 150 to 200 gallons per day of per capita use of water back in the day. And in the most recent years, they've gotten that number down below 90 gallons per day. And that's just through extraordinary infrastructure investment, conservation. We literally have water police that drive around and make sure that, landscape irrigation is happening in a responsible manner, et cetera. Was given a subsidy to remove a regular turf grass backyard and replace it with native landscape, which is low water. Incentives like that. So I know too that Southern Nevada Water Authority has made it against the rules effectively for new construction to use evaporative cooling. So other solutions have to be deployed. So yeah, it's been an extraordinary success story. And that's why places like Australia that definitely deal with these water insecurity realities come to Las Vegas to study what we've done here.
That's amazing. And when you talk about what's been done there, you had mentioned kind of these rings. Maybe you can walk through a few of the things that that Las Vegas has done that's kind of gotten the best bang for their buck there.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is the vision to essentially reuse the water that goes down the drain. So instead of that going bye-bye and all being consumptive, the investment to clean up the water that comes from, black and gray tank kind of categorization, all that water that goes down the drain is processed, cleaned up, put back in the reservoir. I mean, that's huge. That's the game changer. And then it's been policy, making sure that we aren't installing more evaporative cooling towers, making sure that we are removing decorative grass turf, making sure that the golf courses don't irrigate the, whatever you call that, the rough, but instead focus their water just on the areas that are played. Although I would definitely be playing out in the rough because I don't really know how to hit a ball very well. Yeah, so it's stuff like that. Pools can only be of a certain dimension here, so that the evaporation off the surface of those pools. So it's just example after example of policy, and I think a sense of culture that we as a community feel good about making the sacrifice or the compromise in how we use water to preserve and invest in the future of our community.
And I guess you don't really feel, I guess, comfort or difference in your comfort in recycling this water, right? Because at the end of the day, they're just taking the dirty water, the effluent, and basically bringing it back around after recycling it. So it's not like, I mean, you probably also do have, low flow shower heads or something like that. It's not this drastic thing of you're living in a desert, but you're not taking showers with only 2 gallons of water or something.
Largely, we're leading life without compromise. It's a full-blooded life. And by the way, yes, real people do live in Las Vegas. We don't have the 3-day Las Vegas Strip version of life. And yeah, it's just regular life. I will say we need to have a certain amount of green in our cities. So there is, I view that as a balance that has to be struck. Urban heat island is a really big deal, especially for disadvantaged communities, and where we don't have tree cover canopy in neighborhoods, on streets and sidewalks, etc. We're creating health challenges, difficulty, less or lower livability. So we do need to make sure that we strike a balance and don't end up with, a concrete city that is uninhabitable. So that's some of the stuff that I'm working on.
That's awesome. And I'd put a bookmark in this earlier around you wanting to be an evangelist for a secure water future. You said this before we hit record. What does that mean? And I think you kind of alluded to this earlier with your background from Flint, Michigan, obviously being extraordinarily, there's water everywhere. And then kind of Las Vegas, which is very scarce in water. What does it mean to have a secure water future?
It is my opinion that we must have conservation. We must figure out ways for achieving reuse. So that's heavy infrastructure investment. We must certainly do those measures. And I would include in those measures some technology solutions that leverage sensors, potentially AI, et cetera, that help understand if there are leaky infrastructure systems related to water or inefficient. Yes, check on all of that. But my belief is that we need to go beyond conservation and reuse and optimization of current systems. We definitely need to be innovating as it relates to water. We definitely need technology solutions that create whole new sources of water. This is, me getting on my pulpit or whatever to really create an openness and an awareness and interest in interesting solutions that are, it could be rainwater capture, it could be cloud seeding, it could be, et cetera. There's limited viability and a lot of questions related to some of these things. Personally, I have decided to throw myself and all of my entrepreneurial background at atmospheric water harvesting. I do believe that that is a niche in water technology that holds extraordinary promise. If we can make it practical, water is very much a numbers game. Ravi, we can't assume that water at the cost of bottled water, for example, is going to solve industrial scale problems. We can't assume that water that is at the cost or higher than bottled water is going to solve municipal problems. We have to be practical when we think about the cost of water. We definitely want to move away from water that has impurities that are pollutants effectively, not just naturally occurring impurities. And then we want to put water at the point of use so that we don't have to do a lot of pipeline infrastructure in order to access the water resource. Point of use water, I think, is a really big idea. There have been good reasons why a sector like atmospheric water harvesting has not proliferated, and they've largely been due to these practical considerations. When we think about sustainability and resilience, but specifically sustainability, people equate that term generally with green technology, renewable, recycling, what those kinds of ideas come to mind. But when you talk about sustainability, you have to take into consideration the economic overlay. Is this sustainable in terms of product viability, business viability, operational viability? Does this have the potential to be a decades-long type of viable solution? And so I'm thinking about sustainability as it relates to water, both in terms of the resource itself, but also making sure the business behind it is legit and has its own legs. So in any event, as part of the process of diving really deep into atmospheric water harvesting, I've just become so tuned in to our water challenges. And we need people to be noisy about water. We can't lean back about water. It's the fundamental molecule, and we absolutely should be prioritizing it. We, for a decade plus, have been as industry and even as policy, we've been putting a lot of effort into carbon capture, the atmosphere. By the way, the single most heat trapping molecule in the atmosphere is water vapor. More so than methane, just in the aggregate, it's all about water more so than. But we've been investing in carbon, and my hypothesis is that the decade ahead is going to be the decade of water tech innovation, investment, and changing paradigms.
I love that. There's a few things I wanna touch on that you said. You obviously are in the business of atmospheric water generation, and I want to get into the kind of details of what you're building at WAVR. But before we jump there, you mentioned that in your research of AWG, you just kind of really realize what the challenges are in water. And I think it makes sense. Yes, I do believe that the next decade will be the decade of water, most likely because of what you said earlier, right? I think we thought of water as something that was abundant, was always around, and I think we're coming to a future where it's not for many, if not all, cities and population around the world. And so if you kind of look at that, what have you figured out? What are the challenges around water? And then maybe if you can kind of arc that into what you're working on at WAVR. I think yeah.
As an entrepreneur leading a tech company where our value proposition is to provide point of use, pure industrial scale source of water. I want to give you an example of something really thrilling that happened for me recently. My phone rang and it was me added to speakerphone in a meeting of our local economic development organization that was seated at the table with our local water authority. And they said, we're sitting here with a prospective semiconductor manufacturing company that wants to come to Las Vegas. And we're telling them that they're going to use too much of our water. And so they can't come here. Ravi, man, like that means those jobs won't be created. That means those chips won't be made here. That means, the thriving nature of Las Vegas, which we all here in Las Vegas know needs to be more than a one-trick pony town with just gaming, but it needs to be a diversified economy and community. Well, that dog doesn't hunt if we can't let companies come here and operate and create those jobs and livelihoods. So I was just so excited to get a call from that group because they need to solve that problem. They have to find some kind of solution that goes beyond Lake Mead and the Colorado River. So, I think of applications of water that many of us may not have on the radar, but some of you may have been reading lately, Ravi, and no doubt you're totally tuned into this. Like data centers are very thirsty. Data centers are proliferating, and we're talking billions and billions of gallons a year. I did a little analysis for in 2024. There were, I want to say, 23 million images generated on average each day on ChatGPT. Again, these are order of magnitude numbers, not exact. And so I did the calculation on what the evaporative cooling requirement is for that much GPU power. And if you've been to Las Vegas, of course, you've seen the Bellagio fountains and you've seen that big Bellagio lake there. Just making images on ChatGPT last year consumed 10,000 Bellagio lakes, just to give you a visual. So data centers are very thirsty. Chip manufacturing requires something called UPW, ultra pure water. And that's for the cleaning of the chips. But then there's a lot of cooling related water in the facilities at chip manufacturing plants. Pharmaceutical companies require injectable pure water for their medications. Agricultural processing requires cleaning of produce that's brought into the facilities or requires water to put into their food and beverage products. These are massive consumers, just tens and tens of billions of gallons of water annually used by industry. And so when I think about how to make an impact in water, I'm not thinking so much about, the few liters per day that a human drinks. I'm thinking much more about how much industry drinks. So we're focusing our solution that we can talk about on industrial applications that have the potential to really move the needle. We're starting with small systems. So maybe Ravi, maybe what I should do is just stop talking about applications and maybe introduce how we're approaching this from a technology standpoint. Would that be?
Yeah, I think that'd be really, really useful, really valuable.
Okay, cool. So at UNLV, we have this incredible brain trust of researchers at the School of Engineering. They've got amazing researchers, MIT and Princeton background, University of Michigan background, just incredible brain power, happening right here. And I was asked by UNLV to come in and help as an entrepreneur in residence to identify really cool tech. And so I met this group of researchers working in what I was obsessed with already, which is water. And I was really struck by what they were working on. Putting all of the like science fiction implications aside of everything from, Dune to Star Wars to you could go on with the representations of cool water technology. These guys took inspiration from Australian tree frogs. So this is a biomimicry inspired project. And what they observed in Australian tree frogs is they're able to safely stay in the branch. They don't have to go down to the stream where it's dangerous and the predators are and so on. And even in the most arid seasons, they're able to absorb the ambient humidity through their skin membrane into their salty bodies. And so that was their epiphany. They were like, well, could we create that in a product architecture, a device architecture? And so they set about doing that. And as has been published now in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they have nailed this ability. And so they use a skin membrane to mimic the frog's membrane that is very similar to contact lens material. It has just the right pore size to allow for that water vapor molecule to pass through. And then flowing beneath that proprietary membrane is a hypersaline solution, extremely salty solution. And that flows along the beneath the membrane. And I don't know if you've ever done this trick or seen this hack, but like if you spill red wine on your white carpeting, if you put a pile of salt on it and you come back tomorrow, the salt will have wicked all that. So that wicking is what's called negative chemical potential. There's something happening there at the ionic level where chemistry is doing the work for you, and it's one molecule is attracting a different molecule. And very much the same is happening between this hypersaline solution drawing the water vapor in through the membrane from the ambient. So that's the fundamental process. It's passive. We love taking advantage of that. And then that continues to flow in a circuit to a thermal process on the back end where basically we steam off the captured water and we end up with reverse osmosis, distilled equivalent water on the back end, very pure. And the salty solution just keeps flowing around and around. So you can imagine that's not that complicated in terms of a product architecture, and you can imagine how that could scale. And we no longer are imagining. We are actually building systems for our first customers. We're approaching $1 million in first year revenue at WAVR Technologies. WAVR is WAVR. So WAVR, one of the first applications we have is for kidney dialysis. So that's a low volume application requiring high purity. And we are just really excited about how we're tracking on that project and plan to deliver an operating system in 2026 to our customer.
That is super, super impressive. I want to just summarize for the audience really quick. So you have this content, and go ahead and interrupt me if I don't say this correctly. But you have this basically contact lens, right? Let's just call it a contact lens, that you have really salty water, highly saline water that's flowing underneath, and through that, in your kind of wine example of putting salt on a wine spill on your rug, you basically suck the water out of the air through that contact lens, and then you basically heat it up. And once it's evaporated at the end, and you kind of take that steam water back into regular water again, you're just left with ultra pure water, really, really clean water.
Ultra pure is actually a technical grade of water. That's not what this is. This is reverse osmosis level water, I would say.
Reverse osmosis level. So RO level water that's now clean enough to be used in kidney dialysis, or do you have to do any sort of other filtration to it to kind of get it there?
No, it's clean enough to use for a medical application at that point. There may be treatment things that are elected, but it's pure.
Sure. And how does this work? Is this just like the size of like an air conditioner that's like sitting outside of like a DaVita clinic, and then patients are coming in and you're kind of cycling in this clean water into their machines, or what does it actually look like?
Yeah, essentially you've got the vision. So just to give you a sense of scale, and I'll do it in, there's this whole world. Is it gallons? Is it liters? Is it acre feet? Is it cubic meters? So we have all these metrics. I'm going to stay in the US metric of gallons. And so a 100 gallon per day unit, just as an example, would be about the size of an air conditioner sitting outside your home. So that's a good frame of reference, basically 1 meter cube. We are designing our this initial system to be an in-home system, actually in-home, not sitting outside the home. So that way it's applicable to that person, in an apartment building in New York City, right down the street from you in Manhattan. And so this will generate about 20 liters per day, 7 gallons, per day. And it's about the size of a couple of shoe boxes.
Wow. And when you kind of look at the North Star of WAVR, and you have your 10,000 Bellagio fountains that are needed for the 23 million or so images that are generated from ChatGPT or whatever AI system we have tomorrow, how does that work? Is this going to be like high-rise style atmospheric water generators, the size of the Salesforce Tower or the Empire State Building, that are kind of like sucking water from the sky, or like what is, or is there efficiency to be had in the contact lens, highly saline solution to be able to like size this thing down?
First of all, I of course went to ChatGPT and I said, make me an image of, like infrastructure scale atmospheric water harvesting systems. It was pretty badass what it came up with. I will tell you, like, we have a 3-phase business plan. The initial phase is to do low volume, high purity. And the middle phase is to do these industrial scale applications where it's, millions of gallons of water being produced. And then ultimately municipal and communities out into the future. It's a little fuzzy what that third phase is going to look like or how that's going to manifest. So ChatGPT is about as good as we can get on that at this point. But in terms of these industrial scale units, what we've done is we've designed it so that we have like standard unit sizes and they're modular, and you gang up a combination of those in order to meet your specific requirements. So if you need 100,000 gallons, you'll use 10 of our 10,000 gallon per day units. We definitely have economies of scale as we increase in size. So there's shared back-end thermal processing approaches that all of these front-end capture units can utilize. And, to give you a sense, what does a 10,000 gallon per day system look like? It's about 4 meters cubed. So it's still much smaller than a shipping container. We could fit, but we had a Fortune 50 beverage company come to us and say, can you produce 30,000 gallons per day inside of a shipping container footprint? And the answer is yes. So, we're definitely thinking about implementations like that. With all that said, I just want to be very sober about this. We make this very pure water. This very pure water tends to have a higher price tag than municipal water. We're not making water at municipal level price points right now. We're just not there. We're moving in that direction. I don't know that we'll ever get to the artificially suppressed low price of municipal water, but what you'll start to see happening in the world is that the various water authorities that control your community's water, they're increasingly going to start tiering the pricing so that if you're a user over a certain amount, you pay a higher tier, just like tax brackets. You pay a higher tier. And if you use more, an even higher tier. And I think we will be competitive with those higher tiers of water, and we'll be able to be an attractive alternative to those.
Your water also has a purity to it, right? So I think even if you were to get municipal water, you're probably putting it through some sort of RO or filtration process, which in your application is the output of what you guys are doing.
That's exactly right. There's a lot of avoided cost and avoided complexity that we can take advantage of with this approach. And then I just think also truly the idea of point of use access to your fundamental resource, rather than be entirely subject to the reliability, the dependability, the pricing, et cetera, of your region's water infrastructure. You can actually have a viable alternative for all of or some portion of your water needs.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, and I think initially it's going to be some sort of supplemented or augmented solution that we're not going to replace water lines immediately. And I think having some sort of a scaled version of that totally makes sense. Rich, I always like to dig into the entrepreneur behind the chaos. What you kind of mentioned.
Is this where I end up crying or something? Like,
yeah, exactly. You said you were an EIR, an entrepreneur in residence at UNLV, and you came across this really cool technology. What did you do before? Were you in water? It seems like you obviously have been around a lot of water issues like Flint, Michigan, and Las Vegas. But what's your story there?
It's funny, I'm an Asian history major academically, and more broadly, just passionate about history and the humanities and the arts and civilization. Like all of that is just like massively stimulating to me. But it also informs my world that I live in and the world of the future. And so, along with my fascination with history, I've had a fascination with innovation. And from the jump, I can remember, seriously, Ravi, I was like, as a little kid, this is completely like dementing me as a little kid, but I can remember on Tuesdays, once a month, I forget if it was like the first Tuesday or whatever it was, in the New York Times, they would cover, they would feature two patents that recently issued. And at the dinner table, my mom would crack out that New York Times and she would read those two patent summaries to me and my two siblings. And she would always finish by saying, "You should be an inventor. You should innovate. This is the American thing. You should do this." It's pretty cool. It completely twisted me as a little kid. All I wanted to do is go out and play capture the flag. Just like, just get me. So by age 18, I was working with my brother on our first, patented invention, and it was an electromechanical device that prevented dead batteries on cars and boats. And we successfully licensed that to a Fortune 500 company. And then we went on to take the skills that we had garnered and we helped other inventors do the same thing. By the way, as one, I can say inventors are crazy, but we have to be. And so it's hard to work with inventors because just strong-willed and not necessarily grounded in all of the realities that the rest of us are. Just like we're funny breed. But my brother and I realized, well, maybe we could go even beyond inventors and start working with federal research labs and universities that have all of this extraordinary, really credible brain power and research. And so we started working with tech transfer departments at University of Michigan and MIT and Caltech and others, and started spinning out companies. And just we got into a rhythm where we were creating a portfolio of companies. We invested over $70 million of angel and venture capital into a portfolio of companies, started a seed stage fund. All of this was happening in Michigan, in the Detroit area. I just, I got my honorary degree, no degree at all, really, in just geeking out with engineers. I just love what engineers are capable of. I love their mastery of how things work and making things work and, paving new ground. And so just continued to deepen my understanding of I'll tell you, I've learned some things along the way for sure. Number one, simpler is better. Number two, get the smartest people and include them in your project. Don't try to answer every question yourself. Number three, the sooner you can have multiple customer validation points that your crazy ideas actually solve their problems, much better. So many times, I can remember like getting one commercial data point and thinking I understood the market. Well, that was not a good customer discovery or validation process. And so anyway, you accumulate all of these things. And, I started Startup Nation, which has helped millions of people start and grow their own businesses, and co-hosted that nationally syndicated radio show. We did lots of fun elevator pitches on the show, and that was amazing. And at the end of the day, when I came out to Las Vegas, like one of the first things I did is I reached out to the local university and I said, what are you up to at UNLV? And I have emails showing a record of this from 2012 saying, what are you guys doing in water? Because I was just looking around and I was like, holy crap, we have a water problem. Anyway, runs deep with me.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to take this two patents from the New York Times idea. I love that. I wonder if there still is like a newspaper or or like a literary magazine or something that like has I'm sure Science Magazine, their monthly subscription probably has something like that. I love that idea. Kudos to your mom. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be an even more avid viewer, listener of your podcast because I want to hear what you feature. Bring it, man. Bring it.
Rich, I like to end the podcast with one question for all of our guests, and that's: do you have a book, a movie, or a TV show that has profoundly changed the way that you see the world?
I'm going to go to a book I read in college that profoundly set a course for me. And it's called Way of the Peaceful Warrior. I learned in that book that in life you have to be fierce, but you also have an opportunity to be in a flow. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something about just being very true to yourself, figuring out ways to make sure that you have positive impact, but feeling not like a softie or a wuss in doing it, but feeling like a warrior, like feeling the importance of the work. That's probably a pretty inarticulate way to capture what that book. That was the first book that came to mind.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, we always pull those on the show notes. And so I'll pull that out. The Way of the Perfect
The Way of the Peaceful Warrior.
Peaceful Warrior. Amazing. Rich, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was absolutely insightful. I loved it.
Thank you so much for the time, Ravi. Great to talk with you.
All right. We'll catch you soon.
Okay. Thank you.